There are a lot of things to think about when you're looking to move for tax savings. For someone like myself, I would have moved without the tax savings, but for some of you, I realize that the tax savings are what motivates your move, and there's always that piece where you never are quite sure if it's worth it. Today, I'm going to share with you some tips to maximize your tax savings and to make the most of your move. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist. It's where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. So this happens every once in a while as we talk with the people that we help here at Nomad Capitalist, where they're an American, for example, and they're open to the idea of moving to Puerto Rico because the tax savings seem so substantial. Whether they're running a business, whether they're in cryptocurrency, they see their friends going and saving, in many cases, millions and tens of millions of dollars in Puerto Rico, but they'd rather live in California. Or they're an American and they like the idea of moving to Portugal, but they're not really sure because they'd rather live with their family in Florida. Or perhaps you're not an American, perhaps you're from anywhere else in the world and you're thinking of leaving for a while to save money on taxes. You're not sure if you want to be gone for 5 years, or maybe you'll decide to be gone for the rest of your life. But it's difficult to make that decision. And so I'm going to share with you how I look at this process and how I coach people and how my team coaches people to look at this. I happen to believe that reducing your taxes gives you a significant advantage in business to be competitive. The company that pays 40% in tax overall is going to be less competitive and have less money to reinvest in the business than one that pays 5% in tax. If you're in crypto, you could be stocking up a lot more if you were keeping more of that staking income, if you were not paying capital gains on your trades. Whatever the situation, we can act like money doesn't matter. And certainly you shouldn't make all of your decisions over money. I've had a lot of crypto people who've come and said, I want to lower my taxes as much as possible. They're not really keen on moving to Minsk, even though they could do a pretty good job lowering their taxes. The lifestyle element comes in. But here's where I say, there are so many tax-friendly places to go. Here's the method. Figure out how much you'll save and how many years you can commit to. Now, depending on where you're coming from, whether you're an American or you're becoming what's called a tax non-resident of your own country, whether it's Australia, Germany, Canada, what have you. The idea oftentimes, this is not every country, but oftentimes the idea is you're moving permanently, right? You're not supposed to say, okay, I'm leaving for 3 years, I'm on an assignment, I'll come back. That may make your exit process for tax purposes more difficult. So I would encourage people to say, hey, let me make a decision that I think I'll like for a long time. And if I don't like it, I'll change it. If I don't like Portugal, I can always move to Italy. If I don't like Italy, I can move to Thailand. These are all countries that offer tax incentives. But you are, in many cases, allowed to change your mind. The only thing you really can't change your mind on is if you expatriate, you give up your citizenship from the United States or, I suppose, any other country. It's generally pretty difficult to get that back. But if you're simply moving to Puerto Rico, you could theoretically decide in the future, you know what, this isn't for me. And so the idea that you can come back to me is something to keep in your back pocket and help motivate you. If you're going to move for tax savings anyway, if you're going to move, let's say in the U.S. from California to Florida, you might as well just make the extra stop and go to Puerto Rico and lower your taxes dramatically because moving is frustrating anyway. And here's a couple case studies. Had a gentleman recently, and I've changed the numbers a little bit to protect the innocent, but they were projecting about $28 million in capital gains over the coming years. This is a cryptocurrency individual, and of course nobody knows what those capital gains will be, but you have to kind of have some kind of guess. If you think, hey, my crypto is never going to go up anymore, then there's really not as much impetus to move if your goal is tax savings. But they said, okay, $28 million in further capital gains. And they said, we can probably make about $5 million in income. This is all in the next, let's call it 3 years. Now we added up, let's just assume long-term capital gains, which a lot of people who think they're always going to have long-term capital gains, sometimes go into short-term capital gains. And we figured out income tax. And we basically came up with about $8.6 million in taxes that they would pay. Now let's just assume they can save all of that. They may be able to save most of it or almost all of it. But let's just assume 100% tax savings, American moving to Puerto Rico. Obviously, they're going to have tax liabilities on what they've already done, but this is what they assume they can do once they land, once they set up shop in Puerto Rico. $8.6 million in tax will be saved. Now, let's just assume that they're going to spend the maximum amount of time that they're going to need to spend in Puerto Rico, the 183 days. There are other ways you can do it. Well, let's just assume they spend 183 days because their goal is to max out time in the U.S. After all, remember, they're in the category of people who said, we'll go there for the money, but we'd rather live somewhere else. And so they want to spend as much time in the U.S. as possible, so they're going to do the 183 in Puerto Rico. Let's do the math. Let's just say it's 3 years, 183. That's $15,664 per day. Now imagine you wake up, you get the whole day ahead of you, the birds are chirping, and you think to yourself, okay, you know what? This is probably better than I expected. I think most time people move to places, maybe Belarus isn't on the list, but most time, you move to a tropical island, you wake up, life could be much worse, and you think to yourself, today I'm going to save $15,664, and when I push the cash out button in X number of years, that's all going to get paid to me. It's everything that's been accumulated in a jar, $15,000 in change every day, is going to all get paid out to me as one big jackpot when I decide to, in the case of Puerto Rico, sell my stuff while I'm still living there, and then say, you know what, sayonara, I've had enough, $15,664 a day. $8.6 million to a lot of people seems rather nebulous because you think, well, if I have all this extra money, $33 million in this case, why wouldn't I pay the $8.6 million? What's the big difference? And certainly you're allowed to have that opinion. But imagine that every day that passes, you had an extra $15,000 and change to spend, to donate to causes, to put toward your children's education, to build a legacy, to start a new business, to do whatever. I think you'll probably be a better steward of that money than the U.S. government. And again, I would vary this based on if you're 70 years old, hey, maybe you don't want to commit the next 5 years of your life. Maybe you just focus on enjoying yourself. But if you're 30 years old, to me, as a lifelong entrepreneur, the equation here is sacrifice. The equation is I'm making a quote-unquote sacrifice. I'm going to go to Puerto Rico and I'm going to slum it. Again, by the way, you could potentially, in some years, do fewer than 183 days with the different ways they have to qualify. But I'm going to spend that 183. It's not going to be nearly as bad as I thought. And I get a $15,000 and change bonus every day. Let's talk about another case for a business owner. Again, U.S. citizen, wanted to move to Dubai, had a unique situation where it could pretty much reduce the tax to basically zero. Doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but $1.5 million per year, roughly, in tax savings. Again, the goal was not to be in the U.S. all the time. This is a person who takes vacations internationally. But let's just assume the full time that they're going to be out of the U.S., about 270 days, are days where, they're like, hey, we'd rather be in, Florida with the family. That's $5,555 every day you wake up in Dubai. You go to the great restaurants, you go to the great malls, you have the nightlife, you have everything that Dubai has to offer. They're zero tax, and so they're neutral. If you're an American, right, you still have the U.S. side to deal with. But in this person's case, they're pretty much going to save it all because of their unique situation. $5,555 a day. Now, if you figure out, hey, you know what? Out of those 270 days, I would have been gone 60 days anyway, and hey, Dubai seems like a fun place to go for 60 days. Well, then the number would actually be higher. But let's just call it $5,500 a day, basically. And again, every year you get to push the button and you get to put that money back into your pocket. Now, if you aren't American, there may be issues accessing that money. You may not be able to just take it all out and go and spend it. There's many different situations you could find yourself in. But this is the way that I want you to think about it. And so again, if you've invested and taken risks, if you've built a business, you're an entrepreneur, you have already sacrificed. Now, perhaps you say, listen, I'm done sacrificing. Now I want to enjoy life. Again, I ask you, how bad is life on a tropical island? How bad is life in Dubai? How bad is life in so many places you could fill in the blank? There are other places, by the way, where you would pay $50,000 in tax, or $125,000 in tax, or 3% tax, or whatever. And these numbers might be a little bit lower, but you could add in places in Europe, for example. So we can expand the number of places where you'll be quote-unquote suffering. And when you look at knowing that $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 a day is coming into your coffers by making that quote-unquote sacrifice, no one's asking you to move to a jungle in the Congo. To me, that's a great way to look at it, where it's much less esoteric than $8.6 million or $1.5 million. Now, again, if you're the business owner with $1.5 million extra coming into your business, you probably have a way to spend that, and you can probably turn that into an extra $5 million a year if you're investing it properly in whether it's inventory or advertising or whatever. And so now your number is not $5,500, now your number is $15,000, $20,000. But this is how I want you to look at it, is if you commit to a certain period of time, and again, always make sure you put together a proper tax plan to where you know what that looks like and how that should work. But pushing that button every day and having that extra money come to you, to me, is a great way of seeing the world. Maybe you find the next opportunity. Maybe you meet new friends. You have an adventure. So if you don't like to do that, it's a great way to get all those things done and put some more money in your pocket. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. Learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.